This podcast is sponsored by Uncanna, Trusted Natural Solutions. Uncanna is a leading voice of advocacy for CBD in the veteran, LEO, and federal communities. Veteran owned and operated, the Uncanna team is actively fighting for DoD access to CBD with political pressure, community support, and a simple message. Hashtag OptNatural. Uncanna is vertically integrated with industry leaders from seed to sale, supplying premium, small batch products to America's best. Use code MENTORS4MIL at checkout at uncanna.com to receive your amazing discount. Read the Mentors for Military disclaimer at mentorsformilitary.com/disclaimer. This is the Mentors for Military podcast. In this episode here, it's going to be a little bit of a departure from our normal episode anyway, and type of show. But it's not something that's not uncommon, because when Fiona brought this point up to me, actually there had been several women before that had approached me about the same topic. Yet I couldn't find any women who were willing to come on the show. And it's one thing that I mentioned to Fiona. I'm like, this is great, but my challenge is trying to find somebody who's willing to come forward and talk about it. So I think what we'll do is first kind of go around the room. Everybody knows me and they'll recognize my voice. But Fiona, since I mentioned your name, maybe you'll go next, and then we'll go Patty and Jessica.
Sure. So I'm Fiona, and I'm actually stationed at Fort Bragg as a warrant officer in CID. Robert and I don't even remember how we got started talking, but 3 years ago now, I think it's been.
It has.
Is when we recorded an episode together documenting or explaining how I became a warrant officer in CID. As I used to be a regular commissioned officer, having done ROTC, and I joined a pilot program that transitioned commissioned officers to the warrant officer program specifically to become special agents in CID. It was a pilot program. I was part of it. It was very exciting and fun. And I got to talk about that journey with Robert, like I said, 3 years ago. Episode
84. I had to go back and look at that. And I was like, man, it's been that long. Well, I shared with you the picture, I think not that long ago. And go, my God, this popped up, as something that's 3 years from the date that we did it. And I went back and looked at the episode because I was going to mention it on here, and it was 84. So it's one of our first or second year of episodes. Crazy.
I can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah, it has been. So Patty, we just talked about you, episode 182. I decided to do a shout out.
I was going to say, I thought I was 180 something.
Yeah, you were 182, and you just had a 1 year anniversary from your show, which is why I wanted to kind of give a shout out. And then all of a sudden this came up, and the first person I thought of is you. It's like, hey, Patty, this sounds like a perfect, thing for you to come and help co-host.
Thanks.
So if you want to learn about Patty's background, go back to episode 182, and if you probably already listened to it, as a matter of fact, because we just recently talked about it. So Jessica is a friend of Patty's and has extensive background in this topic. So Jessica, you're currently on active duty, or you're retired now?
I'm active duty. My husband is retired.
Okay.
I affectionately refer to him as Household 9. A lot of military men refer to their spouses as Household 6, but since he was the senior enlisted in the relationship, that's what I call him.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're now a professor at West Point?
Correct.
Okay. How did you end up there?
Sheer luck. No, it's my whole career is a story of a lot of people believing in me and pushing me to go to do more. So I was originally enlisted. I was a Sergeant First Class, and I commissioned in 2007. I always tell my students that they commissioned me the year that they took anybody with a pulse in some college. So they took anybody those years, and that's how I snuck through. But at that time, I was a Sergeant First Class, and my other half was on his second tour in Iraq. We had 2 little girls, and we decided that we were going to try to make it to retirement. But in the meantime, I was going to try to commission to, see what else was out there. Because the way that they restructured the Army early on in the early 2000s, they got rid of all the senior NCO positions for my MOS. I was originally a 31 whiskey, 25 whiskey. So then I commissioned. I went to Grey Wolf and First Brigade, or Third Brigade, First Cav, and from there, one of my mentors that and friends that she would become a friend, told me, "Hey, you need to email Colonel Collins and interview for a command." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm kind of a lieutenant," and she said, "Do it anyway." And that interview went very poorly because I couldn't get the VTC up, but Patty somehow had faith in me and hired me anyway. And then along the way, I got an email that said, "Hey, do you want to go teach at West Point from the history department?" And I said, "Cool," deputy of the Behavioral Sciences and Leadership program. And she said, "Oh, you should apply to this Eisenhower program." And I was like, "Cool." And so I did, and I didn't know what I was really applying for. So I was apparently applying to be a tactical officer, which is sort of the company commanders for the cadets here. But instead, somehow I got picked up to be a professor to go teach in sociology. And they said, "Go to grad school for sociology." I said, "Where?" And they said, "Wherever you want." And I said, "Cool." And the rest, as they say, is sort of history. So
where did you end up going to school at then?
Duke.
Okay.
I had no business applying to any of these schools that I applied to. I basically applied to all the top 20 schools on the Eastern Seaboard. And they all said no, except for Duke. So I will forever have a ton of gratitude to Duke for saying yes. And I still don't know why they said yes and why they didn't throw me out. But
That's an amazing degree, an amazing school.
Wait, I want to finish the story. I'm going to interrupt a little
Patty.
bit.
Go ahead.
I remember the story a little bit differently, but what Jess is not saying is she went to Duke and got her PhD instead of just a master's degree, which is a pretty big thing. And I remember, I'm gonna tell this story. You came into my office after you knew you'd been accepted. P.S. Like Duke called me like 3 hours prior and is like, "Hey, we don't have a letter of recommendation from you yet." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I need to do it." So I'm like jamming this on the computer. You get in like 2 hours later. You come to my office. We're all excited. And then I think like 2 hours after that, you came in and sat down and had like this little emotional moment. And you're like, "I don't know if I'm smart enough to get to Duke." And I was like, "Well, clearly you got in, and so you're gonna do it. Like it's gonna be fine. You're gonna be doing it." And she's like, "No. Like I went to college online when I was enlisted. I'm not sure I'm Duke material." And I was like, "Well, get on board because obviously you are." So anyhow, it turned out to be great. So now she's Dr. Jess, and yeah,
That's awesome.
The rest is history.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, going from where you started out as an enlisted soldier and where you have arrived at, I mean, that speaks volumes right there. I think, there's always a challenge for enlisted people or prior enlisted people to rise to the ranks of the officer side. It seems that from history, you only reach maybe 05 and then you kind of hit a bump, and it takes a lot more to get to 06 and stuff and beyond there, just for the average officer. But yet for prior enlisted, it seems to be a smaller subset of that. So
well, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
I'm still only in 04, and I may not make it 05.
you might,
so,
though. You might. You're definitely on a great career path. So Fiona, set us up. So you reached out to me, and one of the main topics that we're going to talk about here, of which Jessica has experience that she just mentioned, is, go ahead.
So I actually, I had been thinking about this for quite some time, but what got me posting on my Instagram, as you saw, was I had just driven back from work and listened to the episode with Patty, because I saw that you had posted about it. I was like, "Oh, I'll give this a listen while I'm driving in," and it just, like I said, reiterated thoughts I had been having for a while about a number of things, what it means to be successful, so how we define success in the Army, and how we make that work specifically as women, how we make that work while balancing being a wife, being a mother, and all the other demands that come with that. And over my very mere 7 years in the Army so far, I've heard a number of different things from friends of mine and from leaders that I've worked with as to what they've either sacrificed in favor for their family, that, their career, they made sacrifices in their career to do that, or what they've sacrificed on the family side in order to move forward in their career. And I think this is further complicated when you're a dual military half, if you're half of a dual military couple, as I am. And something I was actually talking to my husband about is the majority of women, I think, who are in the military who end up finding long-term success, making the military career. And I'm making some really broad generalizations here, But I would think it's safe to say that the majority of those women are type A personalities. And if they're dual military, another generalization, they're likely married to another type A personality. And so you have two very ambitious people who want to succeed in every facet of life, right? And want nothing less than that. So they want to succeed and be the best in their career, whatever job that is. They want to succeed and be the best wife. They want to be the best mother and give 100% all across the board. How do they do that? And is it even possible to give 100% in every one of those categories? Why do some women choose one thing over the other? And there's nothing negative with choosing one thing or the other, but it's one of those things where there's other like-minded women out there like me, and I want to know how they arrive at that decision. What is their decision-making process? Is this something that we can share with other women who find themselves at a crossroads? And how can we encourage them that sometimes you don't have to choose one or the other? Sometimes you can have it all. And really, I find myself at a crossroads right now, which is why this has been weighing on my mind so much. For the ladies here, I just had a baby 4 months ago and just got off of maternity leave. And let me tell you, maternity leave going into telework has been great. And it's really got me thinking. It's really got me thinking about, is this something I want forever? Can I be the best mom that I want to be? Can I be the best wife and still be one of the best at my job, or try to be one of the best at my job? And I'd like to think it is possible, because that is my personality, but I don't know. And I'd love some advice from women out there who've done it. So when I heard Patty's episode, I was like, oh my gosh, here's a lady who's super successful, made the military career, is still working, has a child, and is living to talk about it. So I'm just trying to get all the advice I can get and make sure that other women who are in my shoes can get it too.
Well, and I think the other thing that struck Fiona out of the episode, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the conversation that you had, Patty, with a subordinate at one time frame when you didn't have a child, and then how that changed when you did.
Yeah, I in fact listened to that podcast 2 nights ago when I knew I was going to do this, and I was like, what do we talk about? And I remember being extra judgmental before I had a kid or a family in why someone wanted to go to their son or daughter's medical appointment because their other spouse could be doing that. That was one thing that I brought up. And then when I was driving to my son's first appointment, I replayed Captain Me in my mind, and I was so mad at myself and just disappointed at how shallow my thinking was. And then the other example I used was about the person that told me that daycare didn't open until 6 a.m. so we couldn't have a meeting before PT. That was actually Jessica Dawson.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah.
That's
really
hilarious.
I don't remember that, but I
vividly remember that. And I hope that I remember it the same way. I said, we will never have a meeting at this hour, and thank you for telling me, because that was just something that was not on my radar. And I felt, again, I was like, you feel like a complete fool until someone gives you the blinding flash of the obvious, and you're like, note to self, don't do these things. And I think at the time, Jess, Scott was deployed.
Yep.
You had 2 little girls who were then maybe 6 and 4 or something like that.
What year was that? Yeah, it would have been 6 and 4.
Yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
that's great memory.
And you're a company commander.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you did it. And I remember you'd come into work on a Monday morning and chipper and say that you redid your kitchen floor, you put together a swing set, and refinished the cabinet doors. And I was like, I
not all in
I
one
want
weekend.
a bike ride. That's what it seemed like. So yeah. So I think there are a lot of people. My short answer was, you can have it all, but not all at the same time.
Yeah,
for sure. So I would turn that over to Jess, because you juggled a lot more balls than I did.
I don't know how I did it either. Scott and I were just talking about that last night about what the heck did we do? I know when I started command, the girls were in daycare, but about 3 or 4 months into that, I ended up hiring one of the girls that was working there to be kind of not a stay-at-home nanny, but she would show up in the morning so that I didn't have to do the daycare shuffle anymore. And then as I was getting ready to leave command, she was getting ready to leave, and or something along those lines. And I needed to hire someone else because the thought of going back to daycare was just ungodly horrible, because it was such a massive shift, right? Like you had to be up at 4:45, get the kids out the door by 5:30 to hit the daycare. And that's assuming that there's absolutely no traffic. You got to be out of the daycare by 5:40 in order to get on post at Fort Hood to be able to find parking. Right. So and then you had 15 minutes to wait, assuming you could find parking. But if you couldn't find parking, you weren't going to make it. So it was that sort of that early morning rush. And the kids would get home at night, and we would, I'd feed them, I'd wash them, put them to bed, and at 7, and I was shortly there behind them by 9 or 10. There was one night where I was frustrated with my lieutenants because they hadn't done something. They hadn't published an order yet. And I was like, you guys are out of time. You will not leave until you publish this order tonight. I was like, I have to go get my kids because the daycare is closing. And I had that moment of wow, I am that person that's leaving right now. And so I got home, and then I felt guilty. And so I texted my XO, Lieutenant Christensen, and I said, I will feed you chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese. You can all come to my house and we will finish this op board. Or you can stay at the office, your choice. And so he told the other lieutenants they were coming, and I fed them chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese, and we finished the op board.
That's awesome.
But I felt guilty because I was making them still work, but I had to leave. There was no way for me to not leave my kids at the daycare. So, I think the way that I balanced it that year that Scott was gone was Patty gave me a lot of flexibility. She never gave me grief for not being at work past 1800. And there was one specific incident that I think I'm still in the Army today because of Patty. And I don't know if this is, too early or what, but, we were at a commander's conference out at Fort Huachuca, and we were on the way back, and my mom had flown in to take care of the girls. And she calls me and she says, your youngest has fallen off the bed and she hit her head. And I was like, okay. She's like, well, she threw up. I said, so you're going to the hospital? And she said, okay. And then, we're at Dallas and we're flying in, and Patty was like, go, I'll get your stuff. And so I got to the hospital in time to, basically in time to get on a flight. And we spent 4 days in intensive care because my youngest had fractured her skull.
Oh my gosh.
And I sent the Red Cross message, and my husband's commander did not let him come home. But the thing that enabled me to get through that was Patty never questioned my ability to command and still be a mom in that time, right? Because there was about 3 weeks after that. She was 4-ish, I think, at the time, my youngest. And for about a month after that, she couldn't go to daycare because if she fell and hit her head, we could be talking serious problems. So I had to keep her home. And Patty let me balance that. I brought the kid to work. I worked a little bit, I did as much as I could from home. But she let me command still and be a mom. And I think that is the biggest reason why I'm still in the Army today, is because that was an incredibly challenging and scary situation. And she never made me pick one or the other.
Having been out for a period of time, I can tell you that this conversation is not unique to the serving in the military. And Patty, since you've been out for a period of time and worked within the private sector, I'm sure you've seen it as well, where women have dual roles, and especially if they're in senior roles, they're in the director, vice president type of positions, executive types of positions as well. And both of them are performing, or at least even the woman is in that role, and they're seen by their peer group as being somebody that should be there whenever they want them there. And so it's not unique just to the military situation. And if they're dual executives and have, working those long hours and everything else, obviously it's the same thing. They feel like, they should be there. There shouldn't be any appointments early in the morning. There shouldn't be a doctor's or a dentist appointment. There shouldn't be any of that, because you should give your soul to the company. And Patty, am I wrong? I mean,
you're not wrong.
I'm looking at it from the male side too,
I think there are some super great companies that have really got on board and said, we're hiring someone for their talent, and everyone's going to have a situation at some point in their lives, right? Traditionally, women have borne a lot of the burden of that. I think that's changing significantly also, but maternity leaves are getting longer. My job that I recently left, I remember it was, we did a big office renovation, and we put in essentially a nursing room, which wasn't really a nursing room. It was kind of like a closet with a chair and a refrigerator, right?
Right. And a light, yeah.
But I remember we were almost a little bit too proud of ourselves when we would brief what the renovation would look like. And I felt like we spent an undue amount of time highlighting this nursing room. And I was like, we're talking about 20 square feet here. This is not a big thing, right? But but the thing about doing that, one, it's the law, right? You had to do it. But the other thing is when the younger generation of women coming up see that you are starting to make these concessions, which are necessary, and you do have extended maternity leave, and in some cases, there was some discussion of could women who were very senior have their nanny travel with them, and would the company pay for that? Which I think are very real discussions to have. I mean, if you're a partner at an organization and you're bringing in a significant amount of money, boy, I would hope the company would invest to keep that person to make their family life a little bit easier. So when someone who's 22 or 23 or 25 or whatever sees that as they're coming up through in their career, they're like, hey, you know what? One, you're going to almost demand that in the next organization you go to, and two, someone is setting a very nice example for you to say, okay, when this is my life, then I think this is a doable situation. Shortly after I retired, so you girls remember, obviously, when the military said we're going to allow you to take a 1-year leave of absence. And I think it was, I don't even know if we're still doing that. You guys probably both know.
Career intermission program?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, on one hand, that's great if you have a young child, you want to finish a degree, you have a sick parent. I mean, I don't know where we are in that. I think you were still getting healthcare, right? But you were coming back with the same amount of time and service as when you left, right? So you just kind of took a pause. I think those are great programs.
I thought you incurred an ADSO for that one.
I don't know. You probably know more about that than I do, but you weren't getting paid for that year. It was just kind of like a 1-year sabbatical, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, those are super hard to get approved. I hadn't even heard of it until I was telling Robert I'm part of it's called a Dual Military Women Officer Support Group, kind of a long title, but it's a Facebook group online with other dual military females who are in there. And I heard about it through there. And from what I understand, some other services are way more accepting of that program. I had never heard of it being a thing for the Army before. And I did some research, and apparently it's very difficult to get approved.
Yeah. I ran into a situation within the private sector where I had an office that was out in California, and the individual or the position that I had set out there, an individual applied for that was an intercompany transfer. She was coming from another department. She was the best qualified. However, most of my interview was done on the telephone and everything because she was at a different facility. And I can't remember if I met her in person or not. She was pregnant. And at the end of the day, I had to make a determination. Is she the best qualified or is she not the best qualified? Now, in California, if you guys aren't familiar, there are even longer rules for people to be able to remain away from work, because you not only get the federal, but you also get the state added to it. And then there's another extension that you can apply for. I think at the conclusion of this, she was gone. I did select her for the role, and it was a brand new role that she was going into. She went into it for like 2 weeks. I gave her a little bit of an overview, and then she was gone on maternity leave. And I think she was gone for about 9-10 months. And so my position remained vacant, as if I probably didn't need to actually have that position, because it's one of those questions that you always ask as a leader. Well, if it's been vacant for 10 months, did you really need it? And in this case, it was some tough decisions I had to make. Now, I can tell you, she was dynamite when she got back. She was exactly what I was hoping for. But it was one of these times in my life as a leader that I had to come to some difficult decisions on how to treat somebody that's in that situation. And it was the first time, honestly, that I had ever been put in that type of position. I feel like I made the right decision at the end of the day, but it worked out all the way around.
I always tell my cadets, and I used to talk to my leaders about it when I was in company command, that there is no balance, right? Like, some days the Army wins, and some days, your family wins. And rarely will the two be at the same time. And the pendulum will swing, right? And some days you have to make the decision that's the best for the needs of the Army, and some days you have to make the decision that's best for the needs of your soldier. And those are not policy level decisions. Like, policy can give us some guidance for that, but at the end of the day, we have to look at the situation that's going on and determine what's the right mode to strike here. And it's tricky, right? Because there's so many different varieties of families out there. There's so many different needs. There's so many different ways that people are motivated to serve, but they won't stay in because of the sacrifice that we ask families to make, right? The number one reason that men and women cite for getting out of the military is family reasons, right? So we're losing a ton of talent every year because we can't figure out how to help people balance those things so that they don't feel like they're giving up, their family lives totally. We can blame the Protestant ethic for that.
Do you believe that that's sort of the stigma, the old stigma of, that we probably all heard it, that if the military wanted you to have a family that issued you one, and it either applies for family, spouse, whatever the case may be, but, insert X. And do you think it's kind of that old mentality that's really hard to break because people feel like you joined the military to serve your country and you gave up those other freedoms?
I don't think it's a military specific thing, right? I think it's a very American thing, right?
Yeah.
I teach a block on this in my social inequality class where we talk about this hard work, right? And I remember when I was going through learning social theory, I kept thinking about Willie Loman and Death of a Salesman, right? Here's this man that's given everything to his company, and he's actually worth more to his family dead than alive. And that is a purely 19th or 20th century kind of phenomenon where we want you to work hard and you're going to, be able to give everything to you take care of, you work hard and the company will take care of you. Well, the company, for the most part, the American military is the only company that still does, quote, take care of you in any way, shape, or form longitudinally. But I think it's an American problem. I think it gets accelerated in the military because it is still so predominantly male dominated. And there's not a lot of senior female leaders making decisions about policies like this. And because of the nature of kind of who the decision makers are, the combat arms hua guys that, go back and remember they had a family when they retire. A lot of these senior leaders have wives that are kind of taking care of everything for them.
Yep.
And they are able to focus on everything at work and give everything into work. And then, someday soon they take off the uniform and they try to figure out what's going on after that. For those of us that don't have wives, we're trying to figure it out. We hire people that can help us. We try to offload wherever we can. We find support from other folks that are going through the same thing. And sometimes we encourage folks that maybe this isn't the right thing for you and it's okay to get out. It's okay to walk away too, right? But it's a shame that we lose so much talent every year because of this.
Fiona, what was some of the points that some of the people within the Facebook group brought up on this topic? And what I'll try to do as well is I don't want to make this just an issue or a topic that just women are facing. I think, like I stated, I was put in a situation as a leader where I had, a female, in this case, it was in the private sector. It wasn't a soldier. I came primarily in the combat arms. And when I did work with women, I never ran into this situation within the military. But I think there are going to be male leaders that are going to be listening to this or should be paying attention to this because it is a topic that affects all of us, right? And to your point, Jess, moving forward, we've got to figure out a way to overcome some of this, approach that we've applied, whether it's the Americanism view, the old stigma, the male macho stuff, whatever it may be. We've got to make a shift here and a pivot of a new way of thinking. So I'm just curious as to some of the things, Fiona, that maybe they brought up within that forum.
So I think the most consistent feedback that I got was support of leadership. And these women attributed their success to having understanding and supportive leadership across the board. And had it not been for that, they likely would have gotten out. And I have to say that I have experienced both, just personally, even just in my 7 years, I've experienced leadership that was judgmental, because for my first 6 years or 5 years in the Army, I was a single parent. And then I got married and now we're dual military. So I experienced the judgmental part of it as a single parent, like, oh, you have this to do or you have that to do. Well, like rolling their eyes at me, not understanding me, dragging my kid into PT in the morning because the daycare wasn't open yet. And he's sitting there like shivering on the curb while, we're doing the bend and reach. So I've experienced that. But I would say that more recently, I experienced very supportive leadership. And so has my husband, for that matter. So he's a Special Forces Sergeant First Class. And in his current job, he has leaders who are all about family life. A lot of them are retired special forces who missed out, and they understand, how important it is for especially dads to be present. So we've lucked out. And I would say that my choice to stay in would be largely dependent upon continuing to have that supportive and understanding leadership, knowing that I'm going to continue giving 100% in my job, and they can still count on me no matter what to get it done, in return for their continued support for weird family situations that may arise that are unique to mothers who are active duty or unique to dual military families. Specifically, some of the women who commented back, and I'm not going to share their names because I didn't hear back from them whether it be okay to share their story, so I'll be a little bit vague. But one woman specifically said that her commanders and her OICs didn't skip a beat when she announced pregnancies, didn't skip a beat when she showed up with kids in tow to new job assignments. And that was the number one reason why she stayed in, because she had considered getting out. She had submitted refrad paperwork. They turned it down and were like, no, you are the woman for this job. You are the person for this job. We want to keep you on. And we know that you have a family. We have, like you said, Jess, wives at home who can take care of all this stuff for us. You don't have that, but you're right for this job. So we want to keep you here. And some other feedback that I got was from women who had made what they considered to be sacrifices as far as job opportunities were concerned. But because they had made the best of that particular situation, the best of this new job that they had, that they didn't foresee themselves getting into, other doors were open to them because they were able to shine in those places. And, had they sacrificed family instead, perhaps there would not have been such a reward. And perhaps it would have been more costly on the family side in the end and maybe not been worth that risk.
I'm curious then, from the feedback that you received, did you see, or did they happen to mention that there seemed to be more favoritism from female leaders versus male, or was that ever in play?
So from the feedback I got, that was never in play. From my personal experience, I would argue that some of the more negative experiences that I had in my career were from, unfortunately, women who did not have children, who had made the Army a career and couldn't understand why I was making the decisions I was making at times in favor of my family. I actually think that most of the men that I've worked for, I've worked largely for men, have been the most understanding. And I'm not sure if it's because it's like a topic they're like, ooh, woman stuff, just take care of it and come back to work. I don't know if it was a topic they were afraid to broach with me.
Yeah.
Or if they knew, how hard their wife worked at home or whatever their situation was, they were more understanding from that perspective. Not entirely sure yet.
Yeah. But the fact that they were supportive is really good.
Exactly. I really do think that the Army is outgrowing the chauvinistic attitude that it has a reputation for. Obviously, I've worked in very niche career fields. Military police is largely male dominated, but I'd say in CID specifically, there are way more females than I've ever worked for or worked with. So, combat arms branches, special operations, I can't say whether or not that attitude has expired, but my husband works in special operations and they're super understanding of his situation. So I think that, and something that got me thinking was, women are taking on different roles now in the military, right? Different things are opening up to women that weren't open before. And Patty, you brought this up that you never really experienced the same kind of judgment or judgment at all working in special operations than you did in the conventional Army, because all they cared about, from what you said, was whether or not you could do your job, not, what you looked like or where you came from or what your MOS was. So I'm hoping that attitude remains consistent when women who are in those career fields, infantry, making it through SFAS, whatever it is, decide if they want to start a family, will they incur judgment for that? And I think for those women who are in the spotlight, especially because they're, making progress on these things for the rest of us, I feel for them, because I think that decision will be even harder for them just because they're under the spotlight. Because what I'm afraid of, it's going to be another, oh, well, you're the one who wanted to be infantry. You're the one who wanted to be special forces and deploy every 6 months. And now you're telling us you want a kid. Like, here's just another reason why women shouldn't be on a team, or women shouldn't, do this or that or the other thing. I hope that those women don't feel that way, that they understand that there hopefully is a way to manage that and take a break. I mean, you have guys in those areas who take a break for all sorts of reasons all the time, medically related, even family related. They're able to go to the B team and take a pause. So I don't know. I'm just hoping that this conversation kind of encourages women that this is possible, that it is possible to have a family and continue on. And hopefully that attitude of, oh, like the family or the Army didn't issue you a family, you're an officer first, or you're an NCO first and a mom later, will dissipate.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it is, based on the feedback that you're getting from the Facebook group. I guess I was expecting more when you presented this, that we're hearing still that, that long tail of the same type of prevailing attitude. So if it's shifting already, that's very promising.
Well, so, and I don't know definitively if it is shifting, because obviously this isn't something that I asked everyone. I'm hoping that it is.
Yeah.
But I still hear from friends of mine, that they're worried about starting a family because they don't want their unit to look at them differently. I have a friend who's going to be PCSing here soon, and she doesn't want to start a family because she doesn't want her current unit to hate her or her gaining unit to hate her. And those are really strong words. If your decision to start a family is being affected by what you're worried that people are going to see you differently at work and not just judge you on your job performance, that's huge to me, because a family is a very personal decision. So, I mean, like I said, I hope it's changing. I've experienced certain things, and I know other people have experienced others. I can't speak for everyone, but I'm sure there are still people out there who are getting judged for their decision to start a family or have a family to begin with.
Yeah. I don't know, Jess or Patty. Patty, you've been out for a little while. Jess, you're still in. So I don't know if you're starting to see more and more policies or, those types of things that are coming down the pipe, from leadership that are addressing these types of things, or if it's still, more or less looked at as being something that a commander should have to deal with at that level. And it's a commander's decision. So in other words, is there something that's really coming out top driven, or is this more only at commander level or a lower commander level, company command or something of that nature? In other words, it's at a command discretion.
So there's definitely some policy things going on, with changing the maternity leave stuff and, the length of maternity leave. I think senior leaders actually get it better than junior leaders. There's nowhere in the captain's career course where you talk about dealing with family issues, not in a substantive way. So anytime that we do that old throwaway of, oh, that's commander's business. Well, the first question we have to ask is, when are we educating commanders about this? Because the answer is probably never. I'm hearing from some of my former students that they're still getting a lot of backlash for trying to nurse, for trying to balance the family, the family policy, whatever the family policies are. We just had a conversation about a young woman that's having a child, and they were going to send her out to do cadet training in the middle of the summer when she was 90 days postpartum, and it's like, the Army will go rolling along. They will find someone else. The cadet training will not come to an end if, she's not out there. And it took quite a bit of work to actually get that solved. And it shouldn't have taken that much work. So I think there's a lot of folks, especially folks that are veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan, and, especially from the higher op tempo years. A lot of more senior folks recognize what people sacrifice. A lot more senior folks recognize that, you got to take a knee when you got to be there when you can, because there's going to be a lot of times when you can't. I think the further and further away we get from the higher op tempo years, and the more of those folks that aren't in the Army anymore that don't remember those years, we're going to fall back to kind of the old 90s Army, garrison Army ideas of, well, you can miss this or you can miss that because it's not that important. So I don't know that. I think at the policy level it's getting better. I think at the troop level we're still seeing a lot of problems because we're not doing any substantive work to educate commanders and leaders about this.
Yeah.
And they're basically figuring out as they go along, and that's not always good.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you want to change culture, obviously it takes a lot of work, because changing a culture of any organization, whether you're in the military or outside, is very, very challenging, and it takes a long period of time. And in some cases, it's not successful. So to your point, if education is not part of the process that's ongoing, then we may very well fall back once those senior leaders, are no longer in service, not able to coach, not able to mentor those junior officers, or even senior enlisted for that matter. That's a real case scenario.
Yeah, I mean, and this is probably more lore than anything, but one of the division commanders in Iraq was going to court-martial women for getting pregnant, and he was promptly removed from command, and did not continue to serve after that. So it's and that's a long time ago, obviously. And when I asked the soup about that, because he came to one of my inequality classes, he's like, "Look, pregnancy is a cost of doing business. If we want to retain good people, we have to understand that people are going to need to take care of their families. If we can't figure that out, then we're going to continue to hemorrhage talent." And I thought that was a very interesting remark from a senior leader that had deployed multiple times. We're still dealing with a lot of the more traditional notions that women don't belong in the military. There are a lot of people that don't believe that the women's role is still in there. There's a lot of folks that choose to serve that hold those beliefs, right? They don't maybe necessarily act on them, but they're there and they inform their decisions when it comes time to, decide if someone gets to stay back for X or Y. I remember when I was in Iraq and I was having a hard time with being away from my girls, and the chaplain said, "Well, this is why my wife stays at home." And I was like, "And that was really not helpful. Thank you." And then he gave me the shack to read, which was a whole other nightmare. But it was terrible. So it's like, you get through the good and the bad and you figure it out. But I think if we don't really start enforcing this and having senior leaders walking around checking on this, right? Patty and I were at Fort Hood when, if you had people at work after 1500 on Thursday, you were going to see the Corps commander and explain why. And they were walking around trying to check folks. They were pretty adamant about, you're going to give people family time on Thursdays. And people got hemmed up for it because they didn't think that the Corps commander was serious. And then they got caught and the word started getting out. So, that was obviously a decade ago now because, God, we're getting old, Patty. But, if we want these policies to be taken seriously, we have to enforce them, and we have to walk around and make sure that they're being enforced. And if people aren't enforcing them and they're not, following what they're supposed to be doing, then they need to suffer the consequences for it. Until we start holding people accountable for their decisions they make as leaders, we're not going to have a lot of culture change on this.
That's exactly where I was getting ready to head, and you kind of teed it up perfectly, is what should be the ways in which we ensure that this kind of drives forward. And I think what you're talking about, the top-down leadership, whether it's establishing a policy or something within their command, such as leave at 1500 at 3 o'clock. Well, you also or at 1500, everybody leaves. It's the same thing with, in this type of situation here. If you're putting that top-down type of policy into place, you're making sure that your leaders are truly understanding where your head's at, where you're coming from, and why you think this is so important. Then they're going to follow that, at least until UPCS. And hopefully the next leader that comes into play has the same type of mindset, and it continues this whole thing. But how can we drive this and get this in a way in which we change the culture? I mean, I'm curious to know if you guys have any opinions, or if the group has come up with suggestions for change, as opposed to, this is kind of the situation that we're in. Because I think of the leaders that are listening to this, as well as the women who are listening to this that may be coming in. What are the things that we can do to help both sides?
I think one of the things we have to do is we have to take things off the table, right? I've seen a couple of leaders in the last few years say, we're not going to do this. We're going to take this off the calendar. We have to get away from this mindset that everything is a priority and we can get everything done. The other thing that we need senior leaders specifically to remember is, just because you did X when you were a company commander The Army was 3 times the size it was in the 90s, right? Like when I was a Node Center, soldier, there was 60 people in my platoon, right? A signal company now is 60 people tops. So we had a lot more people to do the things that we're asking people to do. So we got to get senior leaders and leaders at all levels to help us focus on the basics, help us focus on the things that are really important, and take things off the table. If we want people to really take seriously, no, you need to go home at 5 o'clock. Then the leaders need to be leaving at 5 o'clock too, and they need to not be calling folks after 5 o'clock unless it's like a no crap emergency.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's that we gotta have leaders walking the walk and still be promoted for walking the walk.
Fiona, was there other suggestions that were brought up by the group outside of what Jess might have mentioned from a top-down driven and leaders kind of walking the walk?
And I mean, to go off what Jess was saying, I think it's incredibly important also for leaders to take the time to get to know their subordinates on every level. And if you're in a company command position, make sure that your platoon leaders are getting to know their subordinates, because I think that the greater issue as far as balancing family life and your career and making sure that you're successful at both. I mean, there are male soldiers who have wives who work full time. So their situation is slightly different, but very similar at the same time. There's pressure on them too to make sure they're balancing those things as well. So I think just the good old get to know the people who work for you is key in this particular regard. One of the things I had brought up was, and hopefully, Jess, you're dual military, right? So you can perhaps shed some light on.
I was for a very long time. I'm technically no longer dual military, but for a long time I was.
Okay, so well, maybe you can still give us some advice here on how you and your husband balanced your careers, as far as if you ever had to make that choice or have that talk about whose career was taking precedence and when, or maybe you never had to have that talk. Maybe you worked something else out.
Oh no, we had that talk. It wasn't actually me and him that had that talk. He was selected for sergeant major, and I mentioned early on in the show that his leadership wouldn't let him come home when our youngest was in the hospital, and he had decided at that point that he was getting out. And so he was selected for sergeant major, and I had gotten selected for grad school and to come to West Point and teach. And he talked to his branch, and his branch manager said, "Look, you're not going. There's no assignments for you in Durham for you to go with her. You're going to stay here at Fort Hood for a year. Then you're going to go to the Sergeant Major's Academy for a year. After that, you're going to be the lowest ranking one. So you're going to probably go to Korea for a year. Maybe by the time she's leaving West Point, we'll get you guys assigned back together again." And we had already done, year on, year off for, most of our, for the last decade-ish, 8 years. And he said, "I'm done. I'm out." And his sergeant major, his brigade sergeant major was like, "You've got your priorities in disarray, guy. You can get another wife." And yeah.
No, he didn't.
So, he did. He totally did. But then this, it's one of those things that we laugh about now. But basically, he said, "I'm done. I'm not doing it." And he retired so that we could do this. I'm incredibly grateful for that in a lot of ways. And I'm incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to be teaching here, because I really do love this job. And it has enabled me, I've had really fantastic bosses since I've gotten here, where I've been able to take care of the family and still teach. And I've never felt the tension there in a lot of ways. I've been honest with them about some of the challenges that we faced. But yeah, we did have that conversation, and it was never between him and I of, okay, I need you to do this so I can do this. It was the Army basically told him what his next 5 years looked like, and he said, "No, I'm done." The enlisted branch, I don't think, is doing as good of a job as managing as 2 officers would be managed. I don't think they're being managed that well. And when you've got situations like ours, where I was a junior officer and he was a senior NCO, they just didn't know how to work it, right? And we stayed at Hood for a long time because we knew we could both be assigned there, and we knew that we could make it work there. But the time, when I got selected for this, it just became like it wasn't going to work, and he'd been gone for too long. He'd been gone for half our daughter's lives at that point, so he was like, "I'm done. I want to get out and I want to be a dad."
Yeah.
Of course,
I think though. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think we probably all know a lot of couples that have those discussions frequently. I'm thinking of one in particular that they got married as super young captains, and they had a long discussion about, hey, sometimes it's my turn for the key assignment and sometimes it's your turn, and sometimes we won't even get a vote, right? So I remember shortly after they got married, she came to graduate school, and she was a joint staff intern, and he took a recruiting second command in Baltimore, which is kind of cruddy, right? And then they said, hey, next time around, it's your turn to choose, the good deal or the good thing or whatever. And I'll tell the story about the same couple. We all wound up at Fort Hood together. She was a BCT 6, and he wound up being the Brigade 3. Well, when they went to deploy, the brigade commander said to her, "You're going to be my rear D commander." And she was crushed. She's like, "Why? Like, I'm your senior IT person. You should not be leaving me at home." And he goes, "Two reasons. One, you're the best field grade officer I have that's not an S3 or an XO right now." So that was a great tip of his hat to her. And two, I am dual military, and if I have the option to not deploy two parents at the same time, I'm going to do it. And that was a pretty great, brigade commander.
Wow. Yeah.
I will argue that her rear D command was much more challenging and full of more moving pieces and parts than my actual battalion command. And I don't know how she did it. I mean, it was terrible. Just because you wear a force caps and you're leaving all your bad folks home, right? So she had this battalion of a couple thousand kids of, the Bad News Bears. So, and so they've kind of gone back and forth with that, like who's going to get a good assignment and who's going to say take a knee or take an assignment where I can spend more time with the family than, running the rat race right now. So they're very fortunate that they're at the same installation right now. They're both colonels, but now they're having the discussion of we may not make flag officer, and that's perfectly fine. Who wants to retire first, or can we retire on the same day? But I think there are a lot of examples of people that aren't doing very well having the discussions of, I'll take the cruddy assignment or an assignment that's less than my true dream because this is important for our family right now. So I think there's probably some internal animosity amongst couples on you got to be real that not everyone's going to get what they want all the time. And the Army certainly gets a vote, right? The guy that was telling Scott that he was going to go to Korea after the Sergeant's Major Academy, like, do you have a family at all? That would be my first thought. Like, do you have a family? Yeah. So, and then I think I remember that. And I remember, Scott saying like, this is no, I'm done. And I'm okay with myself having retired at a certain level of status. And now I have, time with the girls.
Well, and I remember too, like you swapped me out of command. You weren't going to let me go. And I was very upset with you for that at the time because you were like, no, your husband just got home. You are not deploying right out the door after he got home.
Oh, that's right. I did do that. Sorry.
In hindsight, like, thank you. Right. But I remember being very upset about it because I was like, this is my job. This is what I'm supposed to do. But you were like, no, your family's more important. And I ended up commanding again in the other unit, taking the HHC, which was awesome. But you made that call for me in a lot of ways. And I appreciated it at the time, but I appreciate it even more now.
So then I would ask you based off of that, I see a lot of posts that come up of women who are asking for advice. There's a deployment opportunity or a 1-year unaccompanied tour, special opportunity. Should they take it? They're experiencing guilt because they have a family at home, but they also really want this job. So what kind of advice would you give them?
So mine were really little when I left. And I would say that it was hard to leave. It was harder to come home. And I'm really glad that I went when they were little because they largely don't remember it. I remember it a lot more than they do. And they were little and they were loved and they were fine. Right. But they don't remember it. The people that when you choose to go, you're going to have that regret, right? But they won't necessarily remember it. If you can go in there little, I would say go in there little, not super little, because like 2 out 4, there's a lot of changes and it's a lot of fun and you don't want to miss it if you can. But once they start becoming, once they start talking and stuff, it's like you can leave them for a little bit. But that's everybody's like everybody has to make that choice, right? Everybody has to balance those things out. And I will tell you that you feel differently about it down the road than you did at the time. Things will change your perspective on it. I don't regret going when my kids were little. I'm glad I got to go. My husband and I were stationed together in Iraq, and it was a very weird honeymoon in a lot of ways because that was the first time we got to be together. That was just us without the kids since the kids had come along. So I really do think that year in Iraq saved our marriage, which people laugh at, but I'm like, no, it really did. But I think it's a case of you gotta be we have this idea that moms specifically have to sacrifice every part of their identity to be a good mom. And if the military is something that is important to them, that they want to be able to do, they're going to have some guilt. They are. But it's okay to go and to love what you do and to serve your country and to go on these deployments and to do your job and be a good mom. Like, you can do both, right? There will be guilt. There will be. There will be problems. It will not be perfect, right? There may be second order long-term effects that you don't know about. But it's doable, but you gotta make sure that you're making the right decisions at the time. You're doing it for the right reasons. And it's okay to be a mom and to be a soldier and to want to do your job too. Like, both of those things are okay. And we should encourage more, especially moms to look at that, because military moms are literally breeding the next generation of soldiers. So we kind of got to stop running them out of the military and leaving them with bad tastes in their mouths, because they're going to tell their kids not to serve. And we've got a real problem on the recruiting side of most folks that come into the military are associated with a military family. So we really got to fix that, right? So yeah, they're going to, if they want to do it and they've got a way to have their kids taken care of and know that everything's going to be okay, they should figure out how to do it and figure out how to process the guilt and stuff that they're going to have. Because I can't tell you it's going to go away, because it's not. But I don't regret my deployment. I'm really glad I got to do it. I cherish those memories in a lot of ways. My husband and I have a lot of things that we can talk about now from that crazy deployment that we still talk about, to this day. So I don't regret it. I'm glad I went. I'm glad I went when my kids were little, because they don't remember a lot of it.
I think that's a really hard situation to be in, where you have a deployment opportunity and you have a young family at home, and you are very much torn on your professional versus your personal. And I would say your spouse has a vote for sure, and that needs to be a very real, I'll say whiteboarded conversation of pros and cons and what's right for us as a family unit. And it's easy to say this in hindsight, because I was never in the situation of somebody can always take that deployment, right? Obviously, it's pretty awesome to be asked, especially if it's a special assignment, but that's a really hard discussion, and it's a really personal decision. And I would say my opinion doesn't matter, but your family unit really does matter. Especially, if you want that family unit to be around and healthy and there for the long haul, then that's the most important discussion to have, not so much what your mentor in the military thinks. It's easy to say that when you're on the other side of your career, right? But I think I may not have answered the same way 10 years ago.
Yeah, it is interesting, because I think, not just the dual family side of it, but going back to the earlier conversation, I think, Jess, you brought it up that, a lot of people get out of the military because of family. And I can honestly say that was the primary reason for me. I had a daughter that was entering into high school at the time frame, and another one behind her 4 years. And I knew that by going to the academy, the Sergeant Major's Academy, I would do a PCS move. After that would be a PCS move, probably where I didn't want to live after retirement. And there might even be another one, because then they may offer me another juicy assignment that I may want to go to. And then I was likely going to retire in a third or fourth different location. So those changes, having seen what my daughter had already gone through in multiple moves, different schools, and the effects that it had made me make the decision that I did. And having a dual relationship or dual serving members, I can't imagine the struggle and the difficulty, because I didn't see it that often when I was on active duty, but when I did, it always seemed to be a challenge for both of them to be assigned at the same location. And maybe it was one of these situations where, because they had very different MOSs, it was hard for Branch to do that for both parties. But I had hoped that at least by this time frame, they'd improved upon that a whole lot more.
I just want to point out, though, I think in a very weird way, this pandemic and everyone teleworking at least in the military, right, has opened the eyes of many a leader as far as how many people have complex family lives that they're working around. I don't think I've ever seen before emails go out as far as, asking their troops, all right, who here has a spouse who work? Who here has school-age kids? Who has kids who are at the CDC? You would think that these are all things that leaders should already know, yep, right? But nothing like a pandemic and telework to start asking those important questions. So I think that this is actually, highlighting, like I said, in a weird way, highlighting how many people in the military are balancing family life and work, and how maybe a little bit more focus needs to be paid to that to ensure that we're taking care of people with families so that we don't leave a bad taste in their mouth and we don't push them to get out. Because even in my very short time, I've seen many people get out who have limitless talent, at least in my opinion, purely because, you know, a month after their wife had their first child, they were sent to Korea on an unaccompanied tour when there were 45 other people who could have taken their place. But no, it just had to be this one person.
Yeah.
Kind of like the example that Jess brought up with I think you're the one who brought up with the mother who was 90 days postpartum, who absolutely had to go to cadet training. You're telling me that there's no one else who could have done that?
Yeah.
And it's hard because I think that leaders are going to need to find a balance, an uncomfortable balance between what could be perceived as favoritism versus the reality of someone else can do that job.
I don't think it's favoritism. I think that's a trap that we fall into a lot of times because we think, oh, we're going to give this. It's like, no, we're balancing the needs of the Army versus the needs of the family. And every military family has a time at some point in their career where they're going to need time. Every single one, right? And so I don't think it's a case of favoritism. I think it's a case of leaders communicating like this is where they're at, this is what they're still going to do for the team, and fighting against that idea of favoritism. This idea that women have babies to get out of the field, or women have babies to get out of, you know, training or deployments or whatever. And as someone that, you know, as Patty pointed out, as a younger woman before I had kids, I was very much of that same mindset. Oh, great. And it's like, no, that's not a thing, right? No one in their right mind is going to sign up for, you know, a lifelong commitment to get out of a 2-month field problem. Right. So, I mean, we've got to get beyond this idea that people are doing this to slack off and they're trying to get favoritism or whatever, because I think that it's like families are good for society, full stop. Right. Families are good for the military. Our married soldiers have fewer issues than our single soldiers. They do. They have different issues, but they have fewer issues. Right. So like families are good for society and for our military. So we've got to stop looking at people trying to take care of their families as somehow trying to game the system in a lot of ways, and figure out just how do we help people be their best self and their best, you know, best parent too.
Completely agree.